Hello and welcome. In this week's episode, we're in the uber glamorous Burlington Arcade, just off Piccadilly. Now, today this is just a shopping mall, but it's much more than that. It is a historic venue and it's full of sneaky details. So in this episode, we're going behind the scenes and meeting some of the eccentric characters that make it the destination it is today. My name's Katie, your guide to London's hidden history. I'm a qualified Blue Badge tourist guide and I run public walking tours, private tours and virtual tours all across the city. And public walking tours are starting again from the 17th of April. So if you want to join me on a walk around London, the link is in the description. So firstly, a bit of background. Burlington Arcade was built in 1819 for the Lord George Cavendish, who owned at the time Burlington House, which you can see just next door. Today it's no longer a private home and it's been used for various different societies, including most famously the Royal Academy. The arcade was first designed by Samuel Ware and at the time was the longest in the country. It runs for 178 metres or 585 foot. Something that people often don't realise is that there's a whole underground level beneath your feet in Burlington Arcade. These were used as basements for the Victorian shopkeepers who sometimes lived on site, but there was also a secret passageway that ran the whole length of the arcade. This was used by small boys and girls who would take the shopping of well-to-do visitors and run underneath out of sight in order to deliver it safely to a waiting carriage at either end. It's been partly rebuilt a few times in its history, including suffering bomb damage during the Second World War, and in 1964, when a car charged down the avenue, 6 masked men jumped out and began looting some of the stores. Now there are protective gates at either end, but another recent addition is this beautiful stone floor. It contains 68,000 pieces of English stone, which were cut in Italy, shipped back over here and then rearranged like a giant jigsaw. But it's worth looking closer at the shop fronts as well. As you walk along it, you expect everything is uniform and the same, but no, look closer. These are individual shop fronts and you can see from the protected features that they're all entirely different. If you look up, you can also see some reminders of the long gone Victorian shops. Architect Samuel Ware described it as a place for the sale of jewellery and fancy articles of fashionable demand for the gratification of the public. But there are 2 further stories as to why the arcade was built. These are probably just urban myths, but I'll tell you anyway. Option 1 is quite romantic. George Cavendish wanted to set out a lovely arcade for his beloved wife, Lady Elizabeth Compton. He didn't want her to pick through the dirty streets of London nor get showered on by British weather and wanted her to avoid pickpockets, so he built her this beautiful covered arcade. Option 2 is less romantic. He was simply fed up with the ruffians throwing their rubbish over the wall into his garden next door and thought this would make a good alternative. Whether either of these stories is true or not, George Cavendish did take security seriously because he hired his own army regiment to basically be gatekeepers of the arcade, and these still exist today in the form of beadles. The beadles in their fantastic uniforms designed by Henry Poole & Co., who you can find along the arcade, keep watch and offer a welcoming, friendly presence today. But they also make sure no one is misbehaving, and this is where we get some of the weird rules associated with Burlington Arcade. For instance, no one is supposed to walk with an open umbrella, to shout and run, or even to whistle whilst walking through the arcade. This might seem silly to us today, but the reason behind this is because this was the way that pickpockets would communicate with one another, so it was a way of stamping that out. But that doesn't mean that no underhand or surprising behaviour went on. Burlington Arcade was one of the favourite haunts of the writer Marianne Evans, better known by her pen name George Eliot. And it was in the 1850s that she met her lover, George Henry Lewis, in the bookshop along this arcade. Today it's Michael Rose Jewellers, and it's said that the pair would hide love letters to one another in the pages of the books. On a sort of love theme, between the numbers of 27 and 29, you could find a high-class brothel run by Madame Parsons, and she would hang silk stockings from the windows to show that there were girls available upstairs. As well as the courtesans, Burlington Arcade was associated with two extraordinary Victorian Londoners. These were Ernest Bolton and Frederick William Park. In the 1870s, the beadle at the time, George Smith, described how Ernest and his friend would parade up and down the arcade, painted very thickly with rouge and in women's clothing. They always caused a commotion, winking at other men and even referring to the beadle as "you sweet little dear." Laws at the time took a draconian view of homosexuality, and along with other men, they were arrested and put on trial at Bow Street Magistrates' Court. They were treated awfully by police and medically examined, but eventually found not guilty, as there was no evidence they had ever committed sexual acts. So as ever with London, there are so many details, characters and stories hiding behind these historic buildings that we pass every day. I would love to know in the comments if you've walked through Burlington Arcade or any memories you have, and I will see you next week for more of London's hidden history.